Let's do it. Hi. Hello, everybody, and welcome to ATP Insights, where we cover the most important tech news and tech stories in Asia. Today's Thursday, the 9th of July, 2026. Let's get right to it. We are going to talk about in a bunch of different ways. We're going to talk about how Asia is building its own stack. And we've got another stacked show. Speaking of stacks, we've got a great lineup of guests today. Initially, we are going to have Steve Hunter, the Director of Engineering at Arctic Wolf. He's going to join us to talk about how automated cloud-native security platforms eliminate operational blind spots and mitigate financial risks. And that's going to be interesting. Following that, we are going to welcome Jamie Twiss, the CEO at Carrington Labs, to talk about how AI-driven cash flow intelligence helps lenders safely expand credit and reduce defaults. We're going to talk to Chrissy Lim, founder and CEO at Protaigé, to cover how autonomous orchestration infrastructure eliminates friction and turn corporate brand identity into scalable, real-time operating leverage. That should be interesting as well. And then Luke Salway, Master Facilitator, MCC Certified Coach, CEO at Coachology. He's going to talk to us about how organizational transformation and conscious leadership empower enterprise workforces to convert technology disruption like artificial intelligence into sustainable behavioral capabilities. Right? So this is literally taking stuff that happens online and moving it offline into human development. Later in the program, we'll be joined by Julia Demidova, Head of Digital Assets and Product and Strategy at FIS. Should be fascinating to explore how traditional banks should navigate the shift towards programmable money and ledger-based finance. And finally, Tom Wong, COO at Hola, is going to join us to talk about blockchain-enabled software infrastructure and how this helps businesses build trusted, accountable, and autonomous digital systems. And before we get to all of our guests and some news, let's hear from our presenting sponsor, Twilio. Twilio is the secure and scalable platform to build amazing customer engagement without the complexity, with the AI-driven workflows you need to succeed and to connect. They are trusted by over 300,000 businesses. It is the platform that makes more possible. Visit Twilio.com to start building today. Okay, let's get to some news. Let's talk about Asia wanting to build its own AI stack. I think this is actually really good, and it's a moment in time, right? Like you look back on little pieces of your life and think, that's the day that that thing changed. I don't have an exact moment for this, but I do think that the last 4 or 5 months have been instrumental in changing the story beyond just can these open source models and can everything that, frankly, that's happening in Asia on the model side change the way that we think about what's happening in the Asian artificial intelligence thing. And the most important shift here, I believe, is that the region as a whole, and we see it across the region, not just in China, is starting to assemble the pieces of a self-sufficient AI stack. They're going to have their own models. They're going to have lower cost inference. They're going to have domestic chips, developer distribution as well, and policy control over who has access. Now, I said it wasn't all just happening in China, but I mean, China's definitely the elephant in the room. It's the largest right now. India's coming along. Don't get me wrong. India's definitely going to come along here. But China is currently what I would consider to be the center of gravity. Beijing is reportedly, we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to talk about it in this context because I think it's important, is reportedly considering restrictions on overseas access to its most advanced AI models, including open source releases. The implications of this are gigantic, I think. And these discussions have involved some of the major Chinese technology companies, including Alibaba, ByteDance, and Z.ai or Zipper.ai. And the signaling here to me is super clear. What are they trying to accomplish? Advanced AI models and all of the things peripheral around them that actually impact how these models behave are being treated less like normal software and more like strategic infrastructure. That puts models in the same policy category as semiconductors, cloud capacity, importantly, cryptography, and communications networks. I mean, look, one of the things we talk about a lot is just in contrast to what's happening in Asia, what is Europe doing? Right? Think about it. Who's the biggest chip maker in Europe? Who's the biggest sort of distribution in Europe? We do have a big open source model in Europe, which is Mistral, but what are the other pieces that are around it? It doesn't seem to me, at least at the same scale, that all of these other components are in place, and particularly that the governments themselves are getting involved. We do spend a decent amount of time talking about how policy not just shapes and impacts economic behavior, but drives it sometimes. And when you look at what's happening in Asia, I'm not going to say it's mirroring what's happening in the United States, but clearly look at the impact that all of those, that entire stack has on their ability to create some of the best products, but also some of the best distribution. And they think, we're not learning from that per se. And in a way, maybe it's a little bit of tit for tat, but they're saying if they're going to do it that way, we can behave in the same way. And we have not just the technological chops, but we have all the sort of intellectual and engineering knowledge to be able to do this and to account for this stuff. And again, if you think about this, like GLM 5.2, this is Z.AI's newest model. This is the commercial proof point, right? So if you want to talk about like every little individual piece in the stack, there is DeepSeek, there is all these other companies are out there, but GLM 5.2, I think, is part of this tipping point. This model has become a really, really part of a very large and live debate right now because it appears to deliver serious coding and agentic performance, very similar, if not exactly the same as the big frontier models in the United States, at materially lower cost than leading US models. Okay, Reuters reported that GLM 5.2 ranked 5th on Artificial Analysis Intelligence Leaderboard and 2nd on Code Arena's front-end coding benchmark. Now think about this. Martin and I have talked about this a little bit on AGTP on our global show. If you're in the United States and you have these frontier labs and you want to promote those companies, you can create whatever benchmarks you want, right? So the idea is who's creating these benchmarks. But these are benchmarks not created in China. And Code Arena is still saying that GLM 5.2 ranks 2nd. And it's gaining traction on Open Router as well. We've spoken about this too. So Open Router is a place where like all these sort of metrics are shown, and you can see that these open source models are definitely getting there. Z.AI's own documentation positions GLM 5.2 around long horizon engineering tasks. So not just like this little back and forth of give me an answer to this query, here's the prompt, give me an answer to that, but with a usable 1 million token context window and project scaling coding workflows. So the debate around GLM 5.2 is really a debate around AI economics. Excuse me. And then there is an entire thread actually on Hacker News around GLM 5.2 and the coming AI margin collapse. And what does this mean? Well, and this is an if, right? Because you do have the Chinese government suggesting that they may restrict access outside of China or outside of the region is really what I think is going to happen to people that want to use these open source models at a much lower cost, right? So if open weight Chinese models become good enough, and if they're available, right? Because your best ability is your availability for real work and inexpensive enough for heavy usage, then inferring pricing starts to compress. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking, because we've already done this a little bit. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the impact of this stuff on, on the IPOs of Anthropic and on OpenAI. But it's hard to believe that if their revenues, which right now are based almost entirely on automated coding, could be disintermediated, could be, by some of these big Chinese open source models, Z.AI in particular, which is ranked very highly, particularly when it comes to automated coding, that it is going to change who captures the margin out there. And I think that the Chinese government is very well aware of this. And again, this is not a geopolitical question for me. It's how are you going to help? Like, what's the role of your government? What is one of the responsibilities that they have? It's to ensure that you're living in a country with a robust economy. And competition right now, particularly in the technology space, is very, very global. And they're out there looking around and saying, what can we do to make sure that our businesses have the biggest advantage or the best advantage that we can possibly give them in a way that fits into what the global ecosystem already looks like? I think that's really important. And it also does something else. I hate this term, but everybody uses it. It democratizes the access to it as well. Because if using artificial intelligence, particularly at the inference level, is very, very expensive, well, then fewer people can use it. And we saw this actually when I was at Goldman Sachs. As we lowered our prices, and I've said this a lot, we did way more business and way more people could do business with us, and we still made way more money. And I think this is the way part of the thinking is going right now in the artificial intelligence stack world, is that in this place where inference is created, we don't want to talk so much about training because those costs are more fixed than the inference costs. But where inference is related, If you can lower those costs to one-sixth or one-tenth of what the frontier labs of Anthropic and OpenAI have, you're going to create a lot of demand for these products, particularly if they're at lower prices. Now, DeepSeek, a completely different Chinese company than Z.AI, is kind of the next layer down in my mind. Okay. DeepSeek is developing, and we know this, right? Because again, economic policy and governmental economic policy can drive real outcomes, even if they're only short-term stuff. NVIDIA, through Jensen Huang, had told us already that 20% of their business had been coming from China, but now that's completely restricted. And the lower level, sort of the lower power chips that they've been selling into China just aren't at this. They're just not up to snuff. They're not at the same level as the regular chips that other companies are using from NVIDIA. And there was a moment in time, a short moment in time, but a moment in time as well, where all of their chips were completely restricted. This is, again, government policy can be great and it can be terrible. This, in my mind, falls into the government policy might be terrible here by restricting access there. Again, for so many reasons, not the least of which is if you really want something globally, particularly when it comes to microchips, you can get it. You can at least get enough of them so you can figure out how they work and then try to reverse engineer them, or at least understand the process of how these things are done. And to be fair, where are those chips actually getting manufactured? My bet would be either in Taiwan or in mainland China by TSMC. Okay? So it seems silly to me that you're restricting the sale of chips to a country where they're either manufactured or where one of the islands that's associated with that country is manufacturing them. Anyway, so Reuters is now reporting. Let me back up for a second. And when you restrict the access to those chips, what are you encouraging? Like I always say this, even in my personal relationships. What is your expected when you have an action? What is your expected reaction to that action? When you do something, nothing happens in a vacuum. And this is particularly true for government policy, particularly because the world is so interconnected. What's supposed to happen? What was your expected reaction from me? What was your expected reaction from China? Did you expect them just to go, well, I guess we don't get inference chips then? Maybe we'll just go back to making noodles? Like, I don't understand what your expected reaction was. So what happened? So DeepSeek said, well, we're in the inference business. We're in the model training business. We have chips. We know how this stuff works. We have a basic understanding. And there's an entire cadre of people in China that understand how to design chips and write software that runs how those chips are designed. Let's build our own. It could take some time, right? It could take some time. In the short term, it's a loss. In the medium term, it's a gain. In the long term, it's a massive outlier performance gain, in my mind, particularly for the whole region. I like to say that no one succeeds alone. And China, as powerful and as strong and as smart and as organized as it is not going to succeed alone either. And it will look to partners in this region, I think, to help them here. And again, they're building these chips for inference, because inference is the place where the cost of artificial intelligence becomes operational. Like training gets all the headlines, like they train for 1 billion, 1 trillion, 10 trillion parameters. That's kind of cool. And that creates great headlines. But inference is actually what people are paying for on a day-to-day basis. And the inference is what drives workflow. It's also what drives AI. And a custom inference chip would move. Martin, I can hear you now as well. So this is the through line. Asia is not just adopting artificial intelligence. It is building more of the stack itself. And I think that that's really important. The region is no longer only a market, and almost by definition now, because of the way the US government has reacted to China's ascendancy, the region is no longer a market for US foundational models and NVIDIA GPUs. Okay, it's not. It's not just an open. They're gonna develop their own stuff as well, and I think that's gonna be really important. And China is now has these competitive models. They have open weight distribution, they have aggressive inference economics, and they have domestic chip ambition, and a government that's gonna support this capability. and it's important to them nationally in the same way that it's important to the United States, nationally as well. So we need to pay attention to this, and the result here is going to be a more regionalized AI market cost, where sovereignty, control become as just as important as benchmark leadership. Let's run through a little bit of this. How much of the AI stack is China now trying to control for itself? Well, it already has strong model labs. It already has open weight distribution and huge developer adoption and a massive economy into which you can sell this stuff. Reuters recently reported that Chinese models are widely used globally because of their technical strength and lower cost, especially in coding agentic tasks. And these are the places where most people are using them. Again, if you go back and you look at where Anthropic and and OpenAI are making all their money, it's mostly in those places. And China's coming out and saying our models are just as good. And GLM 5.2 shows this really clearly. Right, from that perspective, DeepSeek's reported chip effort shows the hardware layer, which is again is gonna be really important, and the goal here appears to be less dependence on NVIDIA and Huawei for inference. Now, Huawei as well is also going out and designing and gonna be manufacturing their own chips too, and this is really, really important because model efficiency only becomes strategic when it be compared or paired, excuse me, with reliable compute, and that's actually really important. Really, really important. Um, why does this why does cheaper Chinese artificial intelligence matter beyond price? Like, why does just the fact that it's less expensive matter? Well, lower inference costs can change product design, and we've talked about this before. You don't wanna be a developer and have to make a decision, particularly in the software space. You don't wanna be a developer and have to say to yourself, "Well, I could test, like, 5 more things, but it's getting to be really expensive now, so I'm no longer gonna test all those things." And also for and even for physical product design, if you're using artificial intelligence to do that, you're gonna run into problems if you're being charged, as Anthropic suggests they wanna do, that they are going to charge on usage based. It's just gonna make things way more expensive, and this may restrict your ability, again, to build better products. But if these models are cheaper, companies can run more agentic loops, they can process more context, and automate more workflows without the same budget constraints, and this is actually really important. So even if they do usage-based, which they're not because it's all open source or mostly open source, by definition, they're 1/6 or 1/10 the price of running on Anthropic or running on OpenAI. This is a big deal, and the market reaction around GLM 5.2 from Z.A is not just excitement about one model. It is concerned that high margin AI inference may become harder to depend on if open weight models continue improving. And I think this is actually a really big deal. The other thing that's really important is that less expensive AI also changes geography. Startups in Asia and emerging markets may be able to build serious AI products without depending entirely on the most expensive US frontier models and APIs. So we are going to get to our first guest, but before we do that, let's hear from our second sponsor, Boomi. Martin, I can hear everything you're saying, by the way. It's okay. No, I want to do Boomi first. Beef. Boomi is the data activation company for AI. Boomi powers the agentic enterprise by bringing data to life across your business. Trusted by over 300,000 customers and supported by a network of 800 plus partners, Boomi helps organizations of all sizes and agility, efficiency, and innovation at scale. Martin, let's welcome our first guest today, Steve Hunter, the Director of Engineering at Arctic Wolf. Steve, I am doing super duper. How are you doing? Can you hear me okay? Super duper. Let's get you into the main part of the room, and then we can just jump into this. Great. It's great to have you here, Steve. Thank you so much. We wanted to talk to you again about one of our favorite topics, which is security. We want to talk about how automated cloud-native security platforms eliminate operational blind spots and mitigate financial risk for resource-constrained businesses. But before we do that, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Arctic Wolf.
Yeah, of course. It's the first time on the show, so long time listener, first time participant. Thank you for having me. Arctic Wolf, we're a global security operations provider. We do security operations for a little over 11,000 organizations worldwide, wow, including throughout Australia, New Zealand, and most recently in Singapore and Malaysia, which is part of the reason we're on the show today.
Let's just jump right into this thing. How are security operations teams leveraging artificial intelligence and automation to scale threat detection and response?
Yeah, fantastic question.
Thank you.
Now, in cyber, as you probably know, we've been using kind of high levels of automation and machine learning and AI for over a decade. But what's changed recently has been this introduction of more advanced AI, the generative AI that we're all kind of getting familiar with, and that has really changed the game for both the cyber attackers as well as the cyber defenders like Arctic Wolf. So to answer your question, like how are SOCs or security operations centers using AI to scale? I can talk to the Arctic Wolf SOC. So Arctic Wolf, we're one of the world's largest commercial security operations providers. So we have a little over 1,000 security analysts working full time around the clock to protect 11,000 organizations across the region. And historically, we'd been using AI in the pipeline to filter out the noise, try and identify signal, try to find those moments in time that indicate the presence of an actor in an environment, so we can detect it, respond to it, and contain it. Make a small problem, keep a small problem a small problem. Don't let it turn into a big problem.
Right.
But what's happened recently is with the introduction of new forms of AI, it has given security operators like Arctic Wolf a bit of a unique ability to rethink how we approach security operations. And I'll give you an example. In a pretty typical SOC workflow, so security operations workflow, it's a little bit like a call center. You'll have an alert come out of the tooling that a client will have deployed, and it will come into the SOC. And the first job is to work out, is this something that matters? Is it something that is indicative of potential attack?
Because as you said before, like they're getting a lot of not signals, they're getting a lot of noise. And inside some of that noise, there's a lot of signals, so they have to make this determination as to does this even matter, or is this a distraction?
Yeah, exactly right. And that volume of noise that's coming out that we've got to extract the signal from, that's increasing all of the time. So we keep adding new tools into the environment, and the environments get bigger. We went from on-prem to cloud. We added all of these extra security tooling. So all this vast quantity data comes into the security operations service of whatever organization it is, and now the task is on the SOC to work out where's the signal in all of this noise. So AI comes to the fore here.
So, okay, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into this, but I want to back up a little bit. In some of your research and some of your company's research, right? I think one of the things that I read, it says is like 1 in 3 IT assets lack basic security controls, right, and remain kind of unmanaged.
Yes,
this feels like a blind spot to me. But like, how can enterprises hope to achieve an accurate baseline for this if if it's AI-driven security platform to actually protect this kind of stuff? Yeah.
So this is so frustrating to me, Michael. I think you're referring.
I don't mean to frustrate you. Can I get you a drink or some coffee, maybe?
All good. In the cybersecurity attack surface management report, I think that's the one that you're referring to. This was an assessment that we did of just under 1 million devices that we see through part of our platform, and what we see there is exactly what you called out. Like 1 in 3 of those devices are not patched. They lack security controls. Whatever. The frustrating part of this is. In a life prior to Arctic Wolf, I was in this same space back circa 10 years ago. I was actually working up there in Singapore, where you are today. And it was the same problem 10 years ago. Yeah. So 10 years ago, you can't protect what you can't see. You've got to discover your assets. The foundation of any good cybersecurity practice is identify all of the things on your network, identify all the apps, patch those apps. That's kind of basics. Fast forward 10 years, we're in 2026. We don't have flying cars, and we still have this basic asset visibility problem.
We're almost not flying cars, but go ahead.
And so that becomes that's a little indicative of a challenge more around the proactive nature of cybersecurity. So if you think about the problem we're trying to solve for a client in cyber, there's 2 things. Number one, it is recognizing the reality that actors will get into a company.
Yeah.
Right? And they'll get in through a multitude of techniques, and AI has made that much more likely, and much more likely at scale. And we can talk about that in a minute.
Please do.
But that's the reactive part. So when a thing happens, let me detect it, respond to it, contain it.
Yep.
So that's kind of post-breach, if you like. The other part of the problem is we want to make it as hard as humanly possible for somebody to get into the environment in the first place. And that is where the report that you referenced just then highlights the fact that we're not doing a great job of that either. So identify all of the surfaces that we need to protect, put in the protections, and then make sure the protections are working. Those two sides of the coin, the proactive, protect and prevent the activity from happening, and then the react, detect, respond, recover from it. Both of those things are areas that we work on here at Arctic Wolf.
So I would, my thesis on this, and again, tell me where I'm wrong here, right? You're deeper in this than I am, but at the end of the day, these systems are still being designed by humans. We can have agentic coding and all this other stuff, but it's not, and I always say, like, your kid still has a soccer game on Thursday, your partner may be tired on a Friday night, like all this kind of stuff is true. And I worry that with agentic AI allowing attackers who sleep less, who probably aren't married, probably don't have kids, you know what I mean? Like all these edges that they have, even if they're using the same tools, they can use them in a way that, like, I put we, meaning we on the good side of this thing, don't have the same limitations that they have. How can we at some level get better at protecting these assets when we know, right, particularly your report, other reports just like this, when we know that there are gaps out there that need to be patched, but where it feels like the enemy can move way faster than we can?
I think you highlight to me what is one of the core challenges that we face on the defender side.
Go for it.
This asymmetry around the use of agentic AI. So,
Yep.
the actors, the bad actors are unconstrained. There are no guardrails. They can use whatever tooling is available in any way. And if it causes chaos, causes damage, doesn't work, doesn't matter.
They don't care. Yeah. Can I make the point here? Because I think
Yeah,
you make
please,
a really, I just want to add to this. On the offensive side, if I muck something up, my teammates, like, I'm not going to get fired. They're just going to be like, good try, Harry, but like that didn't work. Because there's no loss. Do you know what I mean? No one is coming into their systems. They're just like, oh, that didn't work. It was a good try, but it looks really stupid. But on the flip side, if the defenders make a mistake or they're false or whatever it is, like, you could get fired. It's a weird asymmetry. So, like, for them, they can do anything they want. And for us, we have to be way more careful. It feels in a way unfair.
I think that you're highlighting probably the biggest challenge that we see in developing and building agentic AI into security operations, which is we need to be able to use that tooling to respond, extremely quickly.
Yeah.
And there are some new paradigms for how you build a SOC to use those tools. But the most important thing is transparency, trustworthiness, guardrails, auditability, judgment. And so I like to say that the attackers are kind of unconstrained. They can use the models to sow chaos. We have to use the models and the technology to sort of to respond in a way that's trustworthy and transparent.
So dig into that deeper for me. How is the landscape evolving as agentic systems become more prevalent? And again, just to give a little bit of context here, the more agentic AI you build, and not your company, but the more agentic AI, the companies that you are helping build, the more kind of open surfaces are born to allow for attacks. Does that make sense? Because in the old days, and again, I'm going to keep saying this until people stop listening to it, but like in the old days, you had this periphery around your company. It was a big wall or a big moat or whatever you want to call it. And as long as that thing was secure, on the inside, you didn't have to be so worried about security, because it was relatively easy to find, like, if Bob started buying a Ferrari and was making 40 grand a year, like, he was stealing something, right? Yep. Either that or he was playing the horses, and that's rare. But now you have all these new agentic surfaces being created, and everyone's like, this is way more productive and way more efficient and way more effective. But oh my God, now there are 1,000 holes that people can get into as opposed to just kind of one. So how is it evolving as these agentic systems become more prevalent? Is that fair?
Yeah, Michael, that's extremely fair. There's two things that you're calling out there. There's the inside out view. So, we had this hard periphery, the perimeter. Really, it's going back 20 plus years. We've not had that for quite some time. And the use of agentic AI inside organizations is very tempting to let data come from inside the organization, outbound, right? Because they're going to put it into the external system. So there's that insider threat challenge. The other part of it is that the attack landscape has changed because of the attacker use of agentic AI. And I think a great example of this is that kind of brings the two sides of this together Sysdig just this month, actually, only I think it was last week or the week before, posted the analysis of a breach that they had seen. I think it's called Jade Puffer, if the audience want to look it up. But what that was, it was an agentic AI system, they infer, based on behaviors of that, exploiting a Langflow interface that was published to the internet. Now, Langflow is a orchestration framework for AI. So organization, jumps on the AI bandwagon, uses a particular AI framework that introduces vulnerability, which is then exploited by an actor using agentic AI themselves to get into the environment and then kind of on to reach and fame and actions on objectives inside there. So I think that, what is that if you boil it down? It's a pretty typical problem, which is, yes, there's another perimeter, and it's a software perimeter related to AI, that's great. It's been exploited by an actor using software tooling, agentic AI in this case, but it would have been an automation framework previously. This is not a new problem. We have been here before. And so if you go back, I'm a bit of an old guy, back when I was living in Singapore, actually.
No, go for it. I love it. I love it.
If you think back to the introduction of Patch Tuesday, remember Microsoft came out with the Patch Tuesday thing? It was in the early noughties. It was about 22, 23 years ago. We joked in the security world that it was Patch Tuesday, Exploit Wednesday. Because...
do not tell me that security guys don't have a sense of humor.
Well, the interesting thing there is, so what would happen is the patch would come out, and then through a technique called patch diffing, so patch differencing, we could have a look at the patch and go, okay, by looking at what they've patched, we can work out what the vulnerability was that they were patching, and then we can do an exploit for it.
Right? That's funny, actually. That is kind of humorous. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, that was 20 years ago. And so what have we got today? Well, we've had, the recent activity with Anthropic and Project Glasswing and all of that, this big explosion in using agentic systems for vulnerability research. It's a version of that Patch Tuesday problem from 20 years ago.
Just on a much bigger scale, no?
Massive, bigger scale and a much more compressed time frame.
Yeah.
So the challenge we have with agentic vulnerability discovery is that the Patch Tuesday, Exploit Wednesday, what the attackers were weaponizing was the speed at which we could patch. We were too slow. So patch comes out, actors work out what the exploit is, and they know they've got a window of time where people are not going to have patched, and they can take advantage of that.
Can we talk about this compressed time frame as well?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because again, we can talk about, like, you've probably seen multiple tech cycles. I know that I have too. And as I look back and then compare it to what's happening today, like, nobody was putting tons of pressure, do you know what I mean, on the IT teams or on the security teams. Like, we have to get cloud here. If we don't get, like, you know what I mean, or we're not efficient enough. If we don't put the cloud in, we're never going to do enough. Like, it wasn't enough. There was a 6 to 9 month lead time where everyone was like, okay, we've made a decision to do a hybrid cloud implementation inside of company A. It's going to take 6 to 9 months to do. We need to hire 40 more people to get it done. We'll keep 20 of them when the project is, like, everything was moving at sort of like a normal human speed. But now, and again, tell me from your experience if you're feeling this as well. But now I kind of feel like somebody on the board talks to somebody else on the board at a golf club, and they're like, hey, are you deploying any agentic AI? And they're like, not yet. Or maybe they lie about it and say yes. And then they come into work on Monday. They have a board meeting and they go, look, what are we doing? It dribbles down into the C-suite. The C-suite starts getting pressure. They go to the IT teams, like, what are we doing with agentic AI? How come no one's using this? Put it on the trading desk, put it here, put it there, give it to the salespeople. And now it's out there. And then it's like, there are no guardrails. There are no, guidelines about how to use it. And then there's a cyber attack, and, like, whose fault is it? Do you know what I mean? Everything just seems to be happening in this massively compressed time frame that didn't happen before. Do I have any of that right?
You're spot on with all of that. And I think the biggest challenge, and perhaps the most interesting thing I see working through this region with Arctic Wolf, is if you're JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, or you're a big investment bank, or your DBS, you've got a large team. Your cyber team is hundreds of people, right?
Sure.
And you're still tackling this problem. This is still a hard problem to solve for you. When you're not, a large multinational bank, and you're a mid-sized electronics manufacturer in Singapore,
you're an SME or an SMP,
SME, SMP. And one of the things I love about what we do at Arctic Wolf is the vast majority of the customers we work with, they are in the SMB space. We have some very large ones. But really resource-constrained folk that they hear about this through a podcast like what we're doing now.
Yeah, for sure.
They're like, well, okay, that's not only is it challenging for what am I going to do with AI internally for my business, but how do I protect against what's coming towards me? And the reality is that we have, especially in the smaller organizations, there's a belief, and it's an incorrect belief, that I'm too small to be attacked. I'm too small to be interesting.
Please say, because you cannot say this often enough. Go ahead.
Well, this is the downside to, number one, it's never actually been true.
Never been true, but it's less true today than it's ever been.
Less true today than it has been before, though. And the thing about that is that the automation in the attacker frameworks, the fact that they can scale whatever the tried and true techniques are that they use. So sophisticated, targeted spear phishing in local language with local nuance tied into, LinkedIn, if you've had a new hire come into your organization. That used to be manually crafted. And so it would be used sparingly because it's resource intensive. Well, now they can do it at scale. It's very effective and it targets everybody. And if they can get $40,000 from a small organization, bonzo, that's great for them. And so that challenge that we have, which is medium-sized enterprise across the ASEAN region, face all of the same problems that the nation states, the national security apparatus do, the big enterprises do. They have to deal with the same threats, but and often, interestingly, they have mostly the same tools.
Yeah.
So you look at the stack for a SME and the stack for a bank, they look 90% the same.
Yeah, makes sense.
But these guys have 500 people doing operations, and these guys have nobody, and that's a problem that we need to solve.
So I'm going to ask a rhetorical question to the audience because I don't think they would know the answer to this. You heard me typing because I wanted to make sure that I had my numbers right. How many, I just wonder how many SMEs or SMBs people think there are just in Southeast Asia. You know what I mean? Because you said $40,000. It doesn't sound like if someone steals 40 grand from DBS, and I love DBS, we have a good relationship with them, but you understand the point. It's not going to go bankrupt.
Yep.
But some SMEs and SMBs, which do make a decent profit, which give great lifestyles to people, cash flow is a real problem, right? So when they're managing the cash flow properly, that's great. But 40 grand, if it comes out of the till and they didn't expect it to come out, it could be fatal. According to Gemini, okay, and let's just cut it in half. No, but let's cut it in half, just to be conservative. Google says there are 71 million micro, small, medium-sized enterprises in Southeast Asia, and that they make up approximately 97 to 99% of all enterprises in the region and drive local economies. I know I don't know the exact number, but I know that it's somewhere between 95 and 99% of all business that gets done gets done to these SMEs, and micro SMEs. So let's just say there are 30 million of them, and each one of them loses 40 grand. What is that? $1.2 billion? $12 billion? I can't do the math. I know 3 times 4 is 12. So I'm just guessing how many zeros there are, right? But you're laughing at me. You're like, can't do that in your head. but you understand the point is that it sounds like a small thing, but at the end of the day, it's not small at all. And I think that's part of the point you're trying to make here. So what happens? How do we optimize this? How do we make it better? What does it look like we're going to do going forward?
Yeah, and Michael, I can back your stats up there as well, because I know for a fact in Australia, it's about 2.7 million SME sole traders here, and they make up about 97% of the GDP related to the industry.
And Australia has 20-something million people?
26, I think, 27. So
let's call it 30, again, just to be conservative. And then if you extrapolate 20 times more than that into the rest of the region, because there's 600, 700 million people, now you're at 60, 70 million SMEs. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
No, all good. So I think to your question, what can we do about it? What can the SMEs especially do about it? Couple of things I'll highlight. Number one, I am very impressed with the way that the Singaporean government is tackling this problem specifically for SMEs. So the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, very, very on the money. They're actually one of the few, Singapore is one of the very few countries in the world that requires companies like Arctic Wolf to have a license to do what we do. So they have a quality standard, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
They have sort of a governance approach or a way for SMEs to think about it. They call it Cyber Trust Mark. So there's guidance coming. There's guidance there actually, and it's updated regularly and annually. It reflects modern threats like AI. Yep. We see it in Singapore. We see it in Malaysia. We see it in Australia. The challenge for most small organizations is they're not looking at this. They're so focused on just competing in their market for their business. Right. They're not going to pivot over here and have a look at a security framework from the Security Agency of Singapore. So taking what they've bought, taking what they've used and what they've got, taking what the industry is telling them, the governments are telling them in terms of how do you protect yourself and what are the threats that are coming that you need to be aware of, fusing that together with a trusted partner, whether it's a IT service provider or an organization like Arctic Wolf, that is where they start, because they're 80% of the way there, but they haven't finished. And the problem is the attackers exploit the gaps. And so you can be 99% amazing, but that 1% is where they'll come in.
Okay, really great. Steve, thank you for coming and doing this. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. I learned something. That's important. Our listeners and viewers learned something as well. Thanks for coming and doing this, man. I really
Michael,
appreciate it.
absolute pleasure. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you. I'll keep trying. Okay, Martin, let's bring in Jamie Twiss, the CEO at Carrington Labs. Jamie, how are you? I am super. Can you hear me okay? No, you, you look great. You sound great. It's almost unfair. Can we bring Jamie into the main room? There you are. Okay, look, thank you again so much for coming and doing this with us today. We wanted to talk to you about how AI-driven cash flow intelligence, really important, and we were just talking about that a little bit actually with our previous guest, transforms underwriting to help lenders safely expand credit and reduce defaults. And before we get to that, tell us a little bit about Carrington Labs.
So Carrington Labs is an Australian company that helps lenders of all flavors, particularly in consumer and small business lending, use artificial intelligence and modern sources of data to get a much sharper understanding of their applicants and borrowers in order to make better credit decisions and get the right amount of money into the hands of the right customers.
And is part of this expanding credit access to companies and people maybe that haven't had access to that credit before simply because it wasn't possible through sort of the standard underwriting and analysis process to be able to even not guess, but to understand whether or not they can actually be a good credit risk?
Yeah, that's a very sharp question. And the answer is absolutely yes. So historically, the tools available to lenders, they were pretty crude. You could pull a credit score in some markets, not so much in others. You could look at what was written on an application form. You could look at a payslip, but really you were flying pretty blind. And so lenders didn't know who was actually a good customer. And borrowers were often frustrated because they couldn't get the money they needed or couldn't get enough money. And sometimes the wrong people would get loans. But there is so much more data today, and there are so many better tools than we've had in the past that makes it much more possible to make the right loans to the right customers.
Okay, I'm going to write down the word data because I want to come back to it in a second, but I want to get to it if you don't mind. How is the approach to credit scoring changing as AI, if AI, and you can help me answer this question, becomes more central to the lending decision? And I say that because we talk about agentic AI like it's been around forever. It really hasn't. Do you know what I mean? Like it hasn't been around that long. It's been around months, not years. So that's why I said if, not as it becomes. But tell me how this works. Like how is credit scoring affected by artificial intelligence, affected by agentic AI, affected by all this new stuff that's happening on the tech side of this stuff? And then we'll get to the implications for that on the data side. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so you're absolutely right to note that it is still early days. So we are, I think, at the very forefront of this capability, and it is changing monthly, sometimes even weekly. So a lot of this is where the puck is heading, and not all lenders have gotten here. In fact, very few lenders are really fully leaning into this yet. But AI does a number of things it makes a number of things possible that couldn't be done in the past. The first one is really understanding the rich set of data that exists around every individual fund or loan and every small business. So in a way that you can't actually look at kind of thousands of lines of transaction data to understand, is this person impulsive? Does this person make good decisions with their money? AI actually allows us to do that at scale and look at individual situations in a way that just makes economic sense. And it does so more quickly and reliably than a human. So that's probably the single biggest change. And then I think the other thing that AI does is it allows us to really streamline what are some very antiquated workflows around lending. If you look at if you look at a loan officer today, what they are doing, yes, it's on a screen, but aside from the fact it's on a screen, it would be recognizable to a character from a Charles Dickens novel.
It's looking at 1920s was where I was going to go, but go ahead. Yeah.
Honestly, it feels it could be done on parchment and candlelight. They're looking at kind of numbers here, and they're kind of copying them there, and they're kind of doing a few jotting down in the margins. Lending has not taken advantage of a lot of the contemporary analytic techniques that are now available. And I think it's time for that to change.
So why is that, do you think? Right, because again, and just to give you an example, like I worked in financial services for 20 something years, and every time a new piece of technology came out, whether I was in the back office, like in the controls department, or as I moved into the trading desk, like if there was new tech out there, all I did was raise my hand. Even if we were trading sort of similar instruments, but it allowed us to trade different stuff, trade it differently, and frankly, make more money. Why do you think that on the lending side, people are just like, yeah, I don't care if there's like a new whiz bang computer out there, a new AI, but I'm fine here with, like you said, with a candlelight and some parchment?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of things. So it's not that lenders aren't smart and they're not ambitious.
No. That's not my point at all.
Yeah. No. But first of all, the nature of change is so difficult in these situations because you have these old legacy tech stacks, and then you have, it's heavily regulated. But I think the biggest obstacle is this is the way it's always been done.
Got it.
And I think until you've seen the power of using a much broader set of information in a much more coherent AI-powered way, it just feels like magic the first time you've seen it. And if you've never seen it, you wouldn't think to try to do it. I think it actually needs to spread kind of in that viral manner through the industry.
So I remember, and this has to be almost a decade ago, and hopefully you remember this as well, like the big talk was all about big data, how we were going to organize data lakes and all this stuff. And whether that data was structured or unstructured, it mattered, but not really on the margin, right? But now we have access to, and back then it was hard. Just getting your data organized was hard because it was coming in just droves. But now, as you've noted, we're getting even more data. And I would suggest that the majority of it is completely unstructured in a way that like current systems are set up to analyze it and to understand. How do we get that data organized in a way that, again, gets it to a point where artificial intelligence, whether it's agentic or otherwise, can see it, understand it, and then use it to make lending decisions?
The worst thing anybody ever said in my line of work, which is data science, is data is the new oil. That led people into a false sense of security that all you had to do was get the data and somehow value and magic would happen. And it's not the case at all, right? It's actually quite difficult to know to do with all this data. And so I would answer your question the other way around. It's not that we have all this data and now we need to sort it all out and then value will appear. It's that we have to do the heavy thinking about what information do we want to get from all of this. And then once you know that question you're trying to answer, then you can go in and get it. And in fact, structured, unstructured data availability, those problems are actually largely solved. They can be solved. The reason they haven't been solved is people don't know what they're looking for yet.
Yeah, fair enough. So can I ask you this too? If cash flow data, right? Because now we're talking about lending, we're talking about cash flow. If it's acting in a way that's like dynamic, and if it's a real-time mirror of financial health, let's say, right? So you're seeing this stuff come in, you have, let's say, connectivity to some of the people that could potentially be wanting to borrow money from you. I know that they used to do this a lot in e-commerce where like your income would fund the lending that they would give you. How do you then prevent this risk from like over-indexing on temporarily negative things? You know what I mean? Where like some big cost comes in or some unanticipated thing happens, but it doesn't affect your overall ability to do it. Like where do humans come into play so that the artificial intelligence isn't going, well, that's a red flag kind of thing, and then denies access to credit? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a really important principle of all of this is you never want to make a credit decision with a black box. So use AI all you want to sort, organize, build the machine, build the model, but then the model itself needs to be explainable. You need to be able to say, here's why this person did or didn't get the loan. And I think in terms of the over-indexing question, it's just about doing it well. So there are lots of people who, they have a big financial event in their lives, but their mindset, their ability to problem solve and kind of reprioritize is very strong, and they're great credit risks. And there are people who nothing at all may be wrong from a numbers perspective, but if you know what you're looking for in that data, you can see the tells that actually this person, they historically have not honored their obligations, and so they're not a good credit risk, even though the numbers may all check out right now.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, a lot of people, even if they have the money to pay off their debts, won't do it just because they feel like they can get away with stuff. This is terrible. We know people like that. Some of them are actually kind of famous. Don't laugh at me like that.
Yeah.
Don't encourage me.
Exactly. I'll just let that one slip by, but yes.
Yeah, don't encourage me. Sorry. But when you are consolidating real time, let's talk about data. I forgot actually that you were a data science guy, which is great. But when you're consolidating real time transaction data into like these broad dimensions, how would you design like a data pipeline to make sure that like all of this stuff is aggregated in a way that makes sense, that you can then make the proper decisions, even if it's not happening in a black box?
Yeah. So that's the biggest challenge.
Right.
Is it's one thing to organize the data, and you can put that in a variety of different environments. The biggest thing by far is when we have all of this stuff, how are we need to convert this into individual numbers for each person so we can train a machine learning model.
Right.
So what are we looking for here? And I think this is where many people fall apart when they're trying to do cash flow underwriting. They simply, we're going to add up all of your grocery store transactions. We're going to count the number of times you took the bus. None of that stuff is very helpful. You actually have to go much deeper. And so, for example, let's say we're looking at somebody over the last 12 months, they had a point where they barely made their rent. The thing that I want to know about that is how far in advance of having to write that check for the rent did they realize they had a problem and start compressing their discretionary spend? Was that 3 days? Was it 14? Was it 21 days? You can calculate that number. It's not that difficult. But you have to kind of think and realize that's a number that you want to test. And so, at Carrington Labs, we have thousands and thousands of individual, what we call features or attributes, ways of taking this flood of data and turning it into numbers that we find are revealing of an individual or a business's ability to pay, but their willingness to pay, their character, how have they done this in the past? And that is really the core of the IP. How do you actually extract that sort of interesting insight from this flood of data?
How do we get, because in my mind, right, like I've only applied for one loan in my entire life. And this was in Japan. I was buying a piece of property. I was building a house, actually. And literally, like, I didn't go to the bank. The loan officer came to my home, sat around my dining room table. I'm not kidding. It was kind of the coolest experience ever. And we filled out some forms. And that was really it. Like, I don't know what sort of digital system this got entered into. It wasn't that long ago. Maybe it was like 20 years ago. But the point is that, like, he didn't have like real-time access to my bank account. He didn't have real-time access to the company that was paying me every month or whatever it was. He didn't know like all this other stuff. He didn't know what my credit card bills were. But I feel like today what you're suggesting is that whether it's a business or an individual, somehow that like systems are being built now that have access to all of this alternative data, for lack of a better term. And I don't know if it's in real time or not, but you can see, because you said before, it's easy to calculate, like when they started compressing their personal expenditures so that they could then make sure they could pay their rent. Like no one would have ever known that about me. What's changed to make all of that possible or even necessary?
So I think what's made it possible, first of all, just the infrastructure around data and the availability of data has gotten so much better than it was. So bank systems have matured to the point where your transactions can be made available. And we now have, in many markets, consent protocols that allow you to share that data. And we've got a way that you can cost effectively catch that as a lender and store it. So there is a lot of just nuts and bolts infrastructure that allows for that. Then I think what makes it necessary is two things. One is the ability to extract that insight. So it's not just 1,000 numbers and we just add up how much you're spending at the grocery store, but actually we get these behavioral insights about you. Do you honor your obligations? If you had to not pay someone back, would it be the credit card company or would it be your cousin? You can get those insights.
Cousin,
and then
for sure it's the cousin. But go ahead.
Look, and we'll make sure to let him know immediately after this this show.
Please do.
The interesting thing about credit, of course, is that nothing changes and everything changes because it's an industry of adverse selection. So once we start to see the volume really move to this better way of doing it, the lenders who are at risk of being left behind really have to scramble to catch up, because you don't want to be the last person unable to spot people with bad intent to repay.
Got it. This is kind of off topic, but again, I can't stop myself from thinking about things when you introduce new topics to me. Where does programmable money fit into this? If it doesn't, if you don't want to answer that question, you don't have to, but I'm sure you've probably thought about it. You know what I mean? We're like, if like one of the maybe the stipulations of actually lending money to somebody is giving them money that's programmable and that they need to allocate a certain piece of that money simply to pay back that loan, and it will physically not be possible or programmably not be possible to buy whatever thing you intended to buy, like a bag for your girlfriend or whatever, because you have to pay off that loan. Are there implications for programmable money in this, and are people thinking about that as well?
Yes, it's a very sharp point. Right now, I feel like that question sits on the other side of converting $1 trillion of lending into the 21st century.
Yeah,
so it feels far away. But the more you can control where credit goes after that point of disbursement, and there are different ways to do that, it significantly opens up your degrees of freedom. And I think to the extent that you can use programmable money to constrain what your loan is being used for, that significantly opens up the ability to provide, especially like growth capital to small businesses, the person who wants to get a second food truck or put more laundromats in. I think the implications of that will be significant and very positive as it enables us to fund growth businesses in particular.
I mean, I will come down on the side that I do think programmable money, it has a little bit of a slippery slope to it, right? Like if we don't have to talk about it, but there are places where it is a little bit of a slippery slope. But you're right. If I take out a loan, if I'm given credit to buy another food truck, to buy supplies so I can have it at a different beach, I can have 2 trucks in you know what I mean, at the same time, and you give me that money and I spend it on buying a mattress for my newborn baby, like that's not what it was meant for. It's still a great thing to buy, but it shouldn't even be possible at some level, I feel like. Anyway, you don't have to answer that, but it's not really a question, but I'm just coming down on your side on this thing. I think it's an interesting concept that people should continue to think about. Where does and I think you touched on this a little bit, but where does transparency and explainability fit in to the governance when AI lending, again, is becoming more prevalent? And again, with the stipulation that it's not a black box, but it's been used to do a whole bunch of the analysis around it, where does explainability come into play?
So the way that we think about this, and we build some of the most sophisticated and complex credit engines in the world, so we think about this all the time, and it's a heavily regulated business.
Right.
We say, look, there's a point in the making of the machine where you don't have to know all the weird and wonderful stuff that we do in order to get to the decision algorithm. But when that decision algorithm gets turned on and it is making decisions about real people, we need to be able to very clearly say, Mrs. Jones did not get her car loan because of these 3 factors and point to real facts. I think if you can't do that, then you are in a very difficult space. I will say that algorithms are a lot better than people in terms of explainability. In the old days, when it just sort of, the loan officer didn't like the cut of your jib, that was not an explainable or fair way of doing it either.
No, it doesn't seem like a good system. Sorry, I'm laughing because I could just have this vision of somebody sitting in a loan office. And I'm thankful that the loan officer that met me did not mind the cut of my jib. So that's nice. And I do think, and I will say this too, I do think explainability is more important when you're getting denied credit than when you're given credit. I think most people don't even care. If they get credit access, they're just like, this is perfectly fine for me. But if they don't get it, then I feel like it's a little bit of a problem. So as we move forward, how much more of this stuff from your standpoint, from Carrington Labs standpoint, is going to be driven by artificial intelligence? Is it going to move into the decision-making process even more? Not to become black boxish per se, but just to make the businesses that are using it more efficient.
Yes. So I think that moment of the actual decision, the actual algorithm, the formula, that I think will always be some sort of deterministic machine learning algorithm. But if you look at all the work and the cost that surrounds that, 99% of it is people kind of assembling bits of data in this and that way, and all of that should go to AI. Right? I see no reason why the future is not some explainable pre-trained machine learning models sitting next to an MCP server, which plugs into the rest of the universe. I don't see where the humans need to sit in any of that. I do think AI will completely revolutionize credit over the next decade.
I don't disagree with you at all. Okay, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on and doing this today. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. We'd love to have you back. Thank you again so much for coming on.
No, thank
really
you. It's fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Thanks.
Man. Okay, that was super interesting. Martin, as soon as you can, let's bring Chrissy Lim onto the program as well. That would be great. But I do like to say again.
Do I exit now? Am I done?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you so much,
Great.
Jamie.
Thanks
I really
so much.
appreciate it. Thank you. Jamie was amazing, and had a great perspective. I love the fact that it was very data oriented and very data centered as well. I thought that was actually really super great, and I loved his perspective on this idea that as we move forward, not black boxish, but the fact that more and more of artificial intelligence is going to use, whether it's agentic or otherwise, to be able to help people that are making credit decisions make those decisions in a way that are more effective and more efficient, and frankly can use better sources of data, and frankly more sources of data as well. Okay, Martin, let's see it. That would be great. Chrissy, how are you? Can you hear me okay? I am doing super. Let's get you into the main part of the room, and then we'll just jump right into this. There you are. Okay, so Chrissy, thank you so much for coming and doing this today.
Thank you so much.
I am presuming it's my complete pleasure. I'm presuming we pronounce the name of your company as Protaigé.
Yes, thank you for getting it right. It is.
But I mean, how hard? All you have to do is think like she went to Google to search for like the URL with the word Protaigé, and it wasn't available, so she had to come up with her friends with an interesting way to spell it. And this is what she came up with, but pronounce it the way she wanted it to be pronounced. This is all I think.
Exactly. And it was just put AI where I couldn't buy the URL. So
exactly. Exactly. Put AI in the middle of it. So I'm so glad you're here because we wanted to talk to you about how autonomous orchestration eliminates operational friction to turn corporate brand identity into scalable, real-time operating leverage. But first, before we do that, tell us a little bit more about Protaigé, please.
So I have spent 30 years in law, advertising, and ad tech, and produced hundreds of campaigns for brands like SAP, Adobe, Twilio, and loads more. So I have really witnessed upfront where marketing teams and their agencies need a lot of help. And I've seen this through decades in the industry, through multiple eras. So Protaigé is essentially an AI agency in the cloud. And what we do is we help companies and brands create and scale their marketing content and creative production without losing quality, but really taking advantage of everything that AI has to offer to really meet their customer where they are, like across all the different channels and all the different touch points and all of the different segments.
So can you walk me through how this type of automation would work, right? And in particular, because up until I don't want to say now, but let's use now as a proxy for this tipping point between before everything was getting automated and now that it is getting automated, right? I don't know exactly what that timeline is.
Yeah.
But there are also new tools and new kind of mindsets and new workflows that need to be employed to do this. I always like to say, like, you can't just take an AI tool, give it to any professional, but in this case, we're talking about marketing and campaign building, and just say to them, okay, here you go. Now use this to do what you've already been doing. So what else changes along the way? What kind of, not training, but what kind of like new knowledge do they need to have? How does it impact the campaigns that they're doing? How does it, there's so many questions. Sorry. Can you just talk a little bit about that and then we can move on?
I mean, it's not a simple,
no, at all.
Like we do get asked, are you a tool or a platform? You know, and we're like, no, we have to be a system. We have to be a platform because exactly as you say, you know, actually marketing is such a complex process. I mean, there's marketing and then there's marketing production and creative production.
Right. So can we, do you mind if we talk about the production side and the creative production side of this?
Yeah.
So, and again, stop me when I'm wrong. I'm not a marketing professional, but I do have access to tools that allow me to create, and I was writing down the word collateral, right? And assets. But for me to do it, since I just started doing it like this year, I don't have any frame of reference for what it's like to create that collateral from scratch. But I will say this, I can guess that a senior person on the team goes to the junior sort of creative person on the team and says, I want to have a piece of collateral that looks like this. And they have an explanation, whether it's written or spoken. And then that person goes and you see me using my hand, but they try to create that piece of collateral.
Yep.
And then it's never right the first time. No one ever comes back and says like, that's perfect. Exactly what I needed. It's like, I didn't say dog. I said cat. Can you please switch that? And that's hard work. But now when you have all this access to AI tools, how does it change the way all this collateral gets created? And how does the iteration process work in a way that's different than when humans were doing it on their own?
Yeah. I think this is actually a really super awesome example because, you know, talking about creating marketing content for your brand and for this podcast, it shouldn't start with, I want to produce this piece of content. It should actually start with, what do you, Michael, what is your vision for your brand and this podcast? Like, who are you marketing to? Who do you want to reach? What are your goals for this year? What are your goals for this quarter? I mean, like this format is something new, right? So what is it you want to achieve with this format? And it's really this objective, strategic starting point of brand plus outcome that should drive marketing content and creation. So I think it was a really great example that you gave, because I think currently in the market, a lot of people are starting with, okay, I want to create an ad, or I want to create like a poster to promote this podcast, and it should look like A, B, and C. Right. But it shouldn't really be the individual deciding whether it should look A, B, and C. There should be questions like, is it on brand? Is it on, is it communicating what your podcast wants to communicate? Is it using the right language? And then is it looking consistent so that you can differentiate yourself from all the other podcasts that are out in the market? And so you're right. Typically, it has been a human marketer briefing a human creative person. It could be an agency or a designer or a copywriter. And then they go off and use a whole bunch of tools and drive it manually to then produce something and come back to you, Michael, and say, what do you think about this? And they'll show you maybe two options. And probably you will probably want to take both options and make it into one. Do you know what I mean?
Are you saying I'm difficult? Is that what you're saying?
So, and so we automate that whole process because, I mean, like, look, whether you work with a freelancer or an agency, they're not going to know your brand and your strategic objectives as well as you know it, right? And what we try to do is encode all of this knowledge into our platform.
So
and it can be fast. Yeah.
Can I ask you this question? Let's say, I don't want to talk about the podcast because then I can ask you like real questions and I should probably have to pay you for that. But let's just say as an example. Let's just say as an example, I want to open a coffee shop in a new neighborhood, but I can see other coffee shops in other neighborhoods and I know what they're doing to be successful from a business standpoint. I see that there are different branding mechanisms out there. I don't want to be just like they are, but I do see what's succeeded. How do I use artificial intelligence tools to then sort of consolidate that information, or any sort of software tools to consolidate that information, understand what's already worked, but then tweak it in a way that makes it more differentiated?
Yeah.
But still within the context that people can understand. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. So what we do on our platform when a new customer, whether it's a coffee shop or anything else, really, is we do a whole bunch of research around the coffee shop, right? The coffee shop industry. Like, so what does the coffee shop stand for? Right. And then the industry of coffee shopping. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then we define what we call brand DNA. So brand DNA is a combination of what the business stands for, what the products and services they offer, and who they sell to. And it's exactly that differentiation that defines what the brand is and how they should communicate, not just in words, but also in visuals as well, like typography, colors, fonts, all of that stuff.
How do you maintain consistency when you're using generative AI tools, in the sense that you could literally give any sort of generative AI team a prompt that's exactly the same and it could come up different five times if you do it differently? Do you know what I mean? So how do you make sure things stay consistent?
Yeah, so that is one of the problems that we really want to solve, because from a brand perspective, I mean, this was definitely one of the frustrations. I have an agency as well, and one of the frustrations that we got was like, if you put a prompt into like ChatGPT, it's like brands need to sound like themselves all the time.
Yeah.
Right. You look at an Apple ad, right away it's an Apple ad. It's the way they speak, it's the way they present themselves and all of that stuff. And that is something that it's difficult to get right if you're doing random prompting into a general LLM. Do you know? You definitely need to encode your brand, and that's really what our system does. So brand DNA is essentially very, very in-depth and comprehensive context. And it teaches all the agencies to speak in a certain way and say certain things.
So how do the agencies behave differently, or how does workflow change, actually, is maybe the better question, right? Because one of the things we talk about, let's say in the finance industry, I just got off a recording with a guy who does credit scoring, basically.
Yeah.
And the workflow changes. Like, one of the great things about employing and deploying artificial intelligence is that it allows you to take a workflow, not just take that same workflow and say, here's where artificial intelligence comes in handy, but to look at the workflow itself and say, maybe we don't even need to do it in this order, in this way. How is that being impacted in your space as well?
I mean, it's not just in my space, but let's just talk about my own company.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like we're a startup, right? And first of all, I'm a creative person. I have never written code in my life, right?
Yeah, I got it.
And obviously, as a startup, building a brand and building a business requires many moving parts, right? And there's no way a startup can afford all of these things.
No.
So we ask ourselves 3 questions, right? Which functions can we hand off to the machine? Which functions must we build and oversee ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third very important question, which comes to workflow, is then how do we design the system that can support and enable and this automation without things going haywire? And so of course it is workflow that has to change, and it can change, and it's awesome that it changes, because marketing is very painful. I can't speak to fintech, but certainly when it comes to marketing and all the fiddly pixel pushing and resizing, and it's really soul crushing. And to be able to
it is.
That all.
It is. I have to guess. Should I move this down 10 pixels?
Exactly.
I'm not kidding. Like, that sounds sarcastic, but it's not. Like, that's why I understand what you're saying, because it's very, like, you're in the minutia for sure.
Exactly. It should be this shade of mauve or that shade of, lavender. It's so many micro decisions.
Yeah. So how do you get past that stuff when you're dealing with people that may not have used the technology to begin with, right? So you could be an unbelievable marketer who's been in the business for 15 years and maybe have never used artificial intelligence. How do you get those types of people on board using the platform and getting them to understand, like, the power of how this stuff is actually working?
Yeah, well, we remove all of that pixel pushing for one thing. I mean, for us, it's start with strategy. You need to start with the bones of who you are.
Okay.
Right, which is brand DNA. But then there's, they talk about marketing being art, science, and orchestration, right? So there are really 3 parts to our platform as well. There is the science, I suppose, which is brand DNA, and also the market signals that make your business different, right? So that's like the science bit. And the art bit is how you look, your visual design and your design identity. And that is also encoded in our platform. And so this way, our agents, whether it's a copywriting agent or a design agent or the photography, the director, the photographer agent, is doing the pixel nudging, is doing the art direction, is shooting the images for you. But their reference is all the stuff your brand has done before, so that you continue to look consistent. And like, another great thing about this as well is, like, I've worked with regional brands and, and global brands, and, global up in their ivory tower are always worried about what the field marketers are doing, right? And they never really want to enable their field marketers because they are convinced that the field marketers are going to mess it all up, right? But like, with a system like ours, it really enables the field marketers to input all of their local insights but produce assets and content that global will approve of, you know?
Yeah, but then, so again, you run into this problem, right? In the old days, you'd have to rely kind of on the agency to do all this stuff for you because you didn't have access to the same tools. And frankly, internally, you didn't even have not just the time, but the compunction to be able to build and design stuff on your own, depending on the size of your organization. Yeah. But now the fact that those tools, your platform is the perfect example of this, are just so much less expensive that the whole process becomes democratized. Yeah. And now you do have people that have access to these tools. Yeah. And they're starting to use them on their own. What does that do, like you said, to this sort of the brand stability, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, that all sounds great to me that everyone can use the tools and make stuff. But brand stability is encoded. It's the guardrails, right? So really, they can make anything that they like as long as it is within the constraints of brand DNA. You know, so... Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the question I want to ask you is like, how do you define what brand DNA is? And then how do you build sort of the software, the technology guardrails around it so that, do you know what I mean? So if company A, like they just don't use flowers in it, whatever it is in their thing, but I as a field marketer said this would look great if it had flowers. Again, I'm just making stuff up, right? If it had flowers in it, the technology, the tool, the platform just tells me, yeah, you can't do that. Do you know what I mean? Is it that draconian, or?
It is kind of like, it's not, it's more like our system would present options that are on brand and say, which one do you like? You know, and I have actually never tried having a marketer and like forcing the agent to go off brand.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yes, I'll do it. I'll come back to you. I'll show you exactly how. Yeah, but the way agencies work as well with their marketers is we will present a few options, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Yeah. You know, and I think that agencies should still do that, and our tool does that. You know, like we present options so that you have enough to choose from, without needing to go off brand, without needing to say, I want to add flowers, because that's really not a question that, in my experience, marketers have asked. They ask about how can we make this more relevant to our segment, our local market segment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough. Sorry. Yes, yeah. Sorry. So you want to make it, if you're in Singapore, let's say you want to make it more Asian than it looks like if it were done in Boston, because like there's no clam chowder in Singapore, but there is in Boston, kind of thing. I'm making stuff up, but that's the kind of idea, right?
That's it. And like, Singaporeans care about this particular aspect, and I need a creative assets that sort of talk to their specific need. You know, so it's not so much a question of like design elements, but about meeting very, very specific needs and communicating them.
How do marketers and creative people feel about systematizing this stuff, the work that they're doing? Right? You talked about this, the creative side of it, the artistic side of it. Yeah. There's the scientific side of it as well.
Yeah.
But again, it's not just in this space, but because that's where you're operating, that's why I'm talking about it. But again, like if you have a loan officer working at a bank or at a fintech, you know, some of them are pushing back. They're like, hey, I'm good at this kind of thing. Yeah. Let me make a decision. Don't put it inside the box and have the box make the decision, because I'm good at this and I have a track record of being good at this. What is the impact on sort of that type of feeling inside of the industry when artificial intelligence begins to become more involved in the process?
Yep. So when we have quite a few agencies in our user base as well.
Yep.
And every agency I speak to are like, hallelujah, because it takes away the most painful parts of the process. So we call it 20% inspiration, 80% perspiration. And we take away the 80% perspiration and leave the art to the humans, because that's the fun part, right? Yeah. And like we use AI. I've got agents coming out of my ears in our team, right? And but my job, like I know what I'm good at, right? And my job is mostly decision making, defining outcomes and testing outcomes, and that's all the fun part, you know, the inspirational part. And you let the machine do all of the heavy lifting in between.
Can I ask you? Oh, it should be tons of fun. Can I ask you one more thing before I let you go?
Please.
does it allow you, right? Because the outcomes matter, right? We're not doing marketing for fun at all. I know, because we do marketing for our own company. It's not for fun. It's to impact and affect business outcomes.
100%.
For sure, right? And anybody that doesn't understand that shouldn't be part of this conversation.
Mhm.
But how do you use the artificial intelligence then, or can you, does the platform allow you to then analyze the data and understand what the outcomes are, so that then you can be better at the next time you iterate, because you're like, here's what we tried, here's what worked, and
Yes.
here's what the outcome was, but we want more outcome, or do you know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the magic of digital marketing as well, because you do get so much data back. And
Yeah.
actually, when it comes to manual processes and human processes, it is a pain studying sheets and sheets of, data points and stuff. But Protaigé can ingest all of that. And sort of, because we're creating the asset, we are publishing the asset, and we're reading the analytics, it just gets smarter with time. And so the next time, if you're chatting with Maya, the account director, you can ask what's worked before. Why did you do it this way,
Yeah.
not that way? There is compounded, like learning that compounds over time, which is why clients stay with their agencies as well, because we retain all this knowledge for the client. We know what works. And it goes as deep as knowing what works for the individual marketer, because they have intuition and gut instincts as well, right?
Yeah. Look, I've said this. I'm so glad you answered that question in that way, because I say this about artificial intelligence a lot. It doesn't replace the job that I do. It allows me to do the things that I do really well, even better. And the stuff that I really just hate doing, that's drudgery, it allows me to ask the machine to do it for me. Anyway.
I'm with you.
Okay. Chrissy, thank you so much for coming and doing this today. I learned a lot. I really appreciate your time. Again, thanks so much for joining the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about
it. Was my complete pleasure. Okay. Bye for now.
See you. Bye.
Okay, Mark, let's bring in Luke Salway. Luke, can you hear me okay? Awesome. It's great to have you here. Let's get you into the main screen.
Okay.
There you are. Okay. Luke, it's great to have you here. Master Facilitator, MCC certified coach, and the CEO at Coachology. We wanted to have you on to talk about how organizational transformation and conscious leadership development empower enterprises, workforces to convert technology changes and disruption into sustainable behavior capability, because we're going through it right now.
Yep.
And it would be nice to talk to somebody who's actually working on a day-to-day basis. But before we do that, tell us a little bit more about Coachology.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. So together with my wife, Coach Chrissy, we set up Coachology about 8 years ago here in Thailand. We were based in Bangkok for most of that time. We recently moved down to sunny Hua Hin. And of course, we're still heading up to Bangkok regularly for leadership development programs and coaching. A lot of coaching is done online, of course, these days, and traveling around the region, running coaching programs and leadership development as well.
So talk to me a little bit about why AI is becoming, or can become, or should become, or has become like a central issue, AI adoption, and such a big leadership challenge for people.
Yeah, so two parts to that question. The first one is I think it's a bright, new, shiny thing. And so a lot of organizations are pretty quick to jump on the bright, new, shiny thing, whatever that might be. And so that's a good thing in a way, that they're willing to explore how they can use this technology to improve their teams, to improve collaboration, and of course, ultimately deliver whatever they're delivering to their customers. I think the biggest piece of the puzzle that's missing at the moment in this adoption is preparing the teams to take on this new technology. And what I mean by that is there are two main things. Number one, the employee, the leader, whoever's being affected, their number one fear is this AI going to take my job?
Even at a leadership level.
Even at the leadership level.
Go ahead.
right? So they're just really uncertain because it's unknown, because we don't know what we don't know. And the AI itself is evolving week by week, as far as I can tell.
Day by day, but yeah, sure.
There's so much uncertainty about, like, what does it mean for me? So, I run a lot of change management workshops, and you could have the best framework for change. You could have the best technology in the world, but if the mindset of the leadership team especially, and then therefore the rest of the team, if that mindset is not ready to adapt to the change, then the best technology in the world is going to fail.
Right. So I think most people look at these types of technological disruptions as just a technology problem. And I'm curious how you identify, like when you go into a new enterprise or even into a smaller business, how do you identify like what the cognitive barriers are so then you can disintermediate them, particularly from leadership, and compounded by the fact that the leadership itself, unless it's a family-owned business, and even then may still feel like I'm going to be replaced by that Mac Mini over there kind of thing. Like, how do you identify what those cognitive barriers are?
Well, to break it down into its most simplistic, you have leaders and business owners that have a fixed mindset, and you have leaders and business owners that have a growth mindset.
Go ahead.
The biggest challenges is the one with the fixed mindset. They'll say things like, "Oh, this is the way that we've always done it." Or they might not say this out loud, but they might be thinking, "Oh, I'm too old to learn this new technology," or "I'm going to learn it now and then it's going to change again." So that fixed mindset and the growth mindset is in relation to change, right? And the world we're living in at the moment, Michael, the things are moving so quickly at such a fast pace that almost every workshop that I deliver, whether it's leadership or change management or integrating technology, it has to start with the human operating system. And we need to help the leaders to embrace change, right? And so there's a really interesting concept.
Tell me.
A lot of people who are leaning more towards that fixed mindset, they resist change. They resist change. It's painful for everyone. It slows things down. And then eventually it's kind of like a little bit of a dip. They get to this point of acceptance. Now, sometimes that acceptance is, okay, I give up, whatever. Do you, young team, do what you want to do. Okay, I surrender. So then they're kind of like on the bus, but they're kind of coming from this place of like, I give up. So it's not very motivating or inspiring. So the trick is with any kind of change management, technology or otherwise, this point of acceptance, we need to bring it back much closer. Meaning, like, the change is announced and then I need to get to that point of acceptance sooner. Now, there's a few more things going on, of course. We need to clearly communicate the change.
Right.
We need to identify the benefits of the change. We need to address the fear that real humans have. And that number one question they ask is, how is this going to affect me? Right? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be made redundant? Am I going to report to a robot or whatever?
But how do you do that? Look, I'm a big believer, and I'm on record as saying this. I've said this all year, actually, that I don't think over time that artificial intelligence is going to remove jobs. It's going to create more work than it eliminates, for sure. It will eliminate some work, though. But how do you, in a dynamic environment, the communication part is really just training. Right. It's hard work, and, senior level communication to sort of frontline workers is always difficult. Right. But how do you talk about the benefits there in cases where, there may be job losses, even though, and there may be job reassignments as well. But you know what I mean? Like, how do you handle the reality of what's actually happening from an executive communication standpoint, even if it's a difficult conversation to have?
Yeah, great question. So I think it needs to be broken down into its smaller components. And I think where some of these bigger organizations are actually shooting themselves in the foot is they're trying to integrate this AI, for example. They're trying to do it all at once, all at the same time, without any real kind of testing or iteration. Now, I'm sure there are some companies that are testing and iterating, and they may be starting in one department or one division.
Right.
But again, I think many of them are falling into this, this bright, shiny thing. It's AI. We must be doing it. They haven't really thought about that from a strategic perspective. And so, one of my favorite workshops to facilitate is strategic alignment sessions, which is just generally for the business needs and incorporating technologies and so on.
Right.
The upper management needs to get aligned first. They need to include some of these frontline staff who will be utilizing this technology, and they really do need to consider the consequences of how might this impact the workforce.
Right.
And I don't know if they know, right? Because it's kind of like, instead of ready, aim, fire, it's kind of like ready, fire, and then we'll aim.
Yeah.
We'll aim later and we'll kind of clean up the mess as we go. I think to keep it more simple, companies should be focusing on utilizing AI in replacing the repetitive and the time-consuming tasks. And then just start with those kind of baby steps, right? Because then with that, even though that sounds very simple, you can look at re-systemizing workflow. We can look at the systems and the process, and we can refine that using AI as a tool to support the existing team members. And then that can potentially free up more time for the workforce to focus on more important things, new innovation, looking at how we can use AI beyond the repetitive and time-consuming tasks to better serve their clients.
Yeah. I mean, I could tell you a story about really bad corporate communication. So let me just share this with you. During the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008, I was running a portfolio trading team at a big bank that begins with a C. It's a global bank. It has a lot of people in it. Anyway, I don't want to say the name of Citibank on the program, so I won't say it. But it starts with a C.
Got it.
My boss came over to me. I was on the equity trading floor, and my boss came over to me and he said, "You need to it's a Thursday afternoon or late or it's Friday morning." He says, "You need to lay off this guy, whatever his name, one of the Japanese staff." And I was like, "Okay, like I get it, but we need to have a better way to communicate with him because his mother's going in for like some cancer surgery over the weekend. Can we do it on Monday?" And he was like, "Yeah, no, we can't do that. You have to do it today," whatever it was. So I walked back to my desk and I'm like, this feels like really bad communication and very bad coaching from someone who's coached him on how to do this. So I had a thought for myself and I went back into his office. It's Friday afternoon and I was like, "Hey, can I ask you another question?" He's like, "Sure." He goes, "When am I going to get fired?" Because you're talking about all these realignments, right? And how it's better for me. He was doing some of the things that you were talking about, right? Saying what the benefits were. If we don't have this guy, we have all this kind of stuff. I'm like, when am I going to get fired? I was running the whole team. And he was like, "Yeah, that's going to happen on Monday." Do you know what I mean? So it was like just terrible communication all across the board. How do you get people to not do what that guy did, right? And have just better communication over time? Like, how do you teach the person to do that and actually give them the real story so that the workplace is actually a better place to be? Because that's a real thing that really happened to real people. One of those real people is me.
Yeah, gee whiz.
I survived, man. Don't worry. Like, nobody died, but I'm just, you know, it's just bad form.
Yeah, it is bad form. And, you know, that's in the area of what we call psychological safety, right? Having a leader who can have that empathy that you mentioned that you were able to have, yet that
it's weird, right?
Didn't seem to have.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. As a coach, I'm working with executives and teams all the time.
Yep.
And unfortunately, there are people that don't want to change. Now, this may be an unpopular opinion, and I'm a firm believer that they're either the executives, the leaders, they're either on the bus or they're off the bus.
Yeah, fair enough.
And what I mean by that is you can try to coach them, you can mentor them, you can give them feedback, you can do disciplinary warnings and all those kinds of things. At the end of the day, the individual has to want to change.
Right.
And if they're not willing to change, if they're not willing to adapt to whatever change process is going on, then they need to be invited to leave the bus. Because that person, they are like, the company's trying to drive with the foot on the gas and those one or two people who may or may not be toxic, they're driving with their foot on the brake. And with that zero empathy, they don't create a safe environment, and that will not create sustainable growth for that organization.
I would submit to you that those people are hanging their hands out the windows of the bus and like creating danger, but that's just it's just a different part of the analogy. How do we measure then, or how do we teach people to measure these skills that you're talking about? Because I believe this actually, that the more technical skills from a performance standpoint become more and more important, right? Yes. And that softer skills are harder. Like, how do you end up measuring or understanding how to cultivate this sort of higher order human traits like empathy, as you suggested, right? And even better negotiating skills inside of this environment where the tech skills seem to be omnipotent.
Yeah. In a couple of years, AI will probably be able to conduct that survey for us. If it's got a camera, in the office, the camera can observe, the AI can interpret that data and tell us very quickly.
Luke, that's not a good answer.
There yet. In the short term, the best way to measure behavior is with 360-degree surveys, where the leader or executive is getting feedback from all those 4 dimensions. Then as the coach, I will present that information to the leader and say, hey, listen, this is how you are perceived in the environment. Would you like to make any changes? Now, as a coach, I can never tell people what to do. I can never force them to change. They have to want to change.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will say no to coaching a client because the coachee is not willing. And I'm not a policeman. I'm not, I'm not going to rough them up a little bit.
Oh, come on. Maybe you should.
Even though they might deserve it. And so you have a benchmark. You do the 360 surveys before the coaching engagement. You do the 360s after, usually around 9 to 12 months later. And in theory, we see an improvement in behavior. And, we've done that full coaching process where I will work with the stakeholders as well. I'll let them know. We communicate very clearly that here's the executive, here's what we're working on. They give the scores, and then it's a very synergistic process where I'm not just coaching the individual. We actually structure it so that those stakeholders, they give feedback once a month and they give feed forward once a month to most support that leader to develop over that 6 to 12 month period.
Got it. So what does, because we talked about this a little bit, right? Upskilling. There's still going to be people that need to have their technical skills upskilled. That's going to have to happen.
Yes.
And it's probably going to have to happen internally. But what does like a comprehensive human-centric plan look like that gives them the technical skills that they need, but also protects the well-being of people that are still there, or even the new people that get hired in, so that they understand that, like, yeah, machine's doing a lot of the work here, but you're still really important.
Yeah. So the traditional 3-year talent development plan that, the learning and development director would format, that doesn't really, that's not accurate these days because technology is changing so quickly and just world dynamics in general. Things are moving so quickly. A rigid 3-year plan is not the solution. I like to recommend that individuals develop an individual development plan. Okay. And so rather than doing a performance review once every 12 months, each leader has the opportunity to meet with his or her supervisor once every 3 months. And then they have a discussion. So it's not just focused on the past, you did this wrong, what happened with that project, or good job on that thing.
Yeah.
Yes, that can be addressed. And it's also looking at the future. And then I would go as far to say that we empower the leader to look at what kind of learning that they want to do, what kind of development would be most suited to their career path, to their job function, and what's happening in that industry, that organization. And that can be broken down into micro learning for the more hard technical skills, where they can LinkedIn Learning and all these other things, like that's pretty easy to access. And then there'll be those soft skill areas where they might benefit from joining an NLP training, for example, or to receive some one-on-one coaching. I think to break it down and make it a little bit more consumable, accessible for each of the leaders.
One more thing, but as things change, and as they're changing really rapidly right now, like I always felt like when I was at Goldman Sachs, I could experiment with stuff. Like I couldn't experiment on investment strategies, but I could experiment on like how to use new technology. It felt very like no one was like, don't do that. Do you know what I mean? It was very open with experimentation. How do you build that into a company where maybe that's not always been prevalent, but because of the speed with which AI is using and the speed with which it's spreading inside of institutions, you kind of need to be able to experiment at some level.
Absolutely. And I love that exact word. It's exactly what I use with my teams. And it's the word that I use when I'm working with other executives, because there's a whole lot of heaviness around this word failure.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of resistance to technology or AI is because like, oh, what if I mess it up?
Yep.
Right. So we need to change the language a little bit and say, okay, whether it's a project or technology adoption, like we're going to do a little experiment, right? So, you know, you can block some time out per week, whether it's 1 hour a week or a fortnight, whatever it happens to be, or 20 minutes per day, depending on the schedule. Yep. And this is my time to experiment. I'm going to play in the sand pit. All right. I'm going to try it. I'm going to fail, but it's not a failure. It's just a learning. I learned what didn't work. Right. And then I'm going to adapt. And so we kind of learn experientially. So I think if they back that on with these micro learnings that they can learn from a e-learning platform, and then they factor in this time, they build it into their calendar that this is my play time. I'm going to play in the sandbox. Right. And that can be either done individually or with a small team. Right. And that's the safe zone. We expect that you're not going to get it perfect and we're going to make a mistake, but it's not like the end of the world. And in fact, it's expected.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Look, this was awesome. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for coming and joining us on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too, Michael. Likewise, really enjoyed the chat and best wishes. See you somewhere in the world soon.
Hopefully. Yeah, exactly. Maybe in Bangkok running around for sure. Thanks.
Ciao, ciao. Bye.
Okay, Martin. Yeah, look, you can just hang up. Okay, Martin, let's bring in Julia. Julia. Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know where you are, but okay. Let's just say hello. Let's bring Julia into the main room. There you are. Look, thank you so much for coming and joining us. The head of digital asset product and strategy at FIS. This should be fascinating. We wanted to talk to you about how traditional banks and financial institutions should navigate the shift toward programmable money, which you won't be surprised that I already mentioned to somebody today in a different context, and ledger-based finance. But first, just for maybe the small piece of our audience that are watching that doesn't know what FIS is, why don't you give them a little bit of background there, and then we can jump into this thing, yeah?
Sure, happy to give an introduction to myself and FIS. At FIS, I do product development and digital assets. With a focus on stablecoins, tokenized deposits,
love it,
as well as tokenized assets, and of course infrastructure that banks need to support those assets. I've been working on, the product called Lyric at FIS. It's our digital asset infrastructure platform for banks and regulated financial institutions. Technically, Lyric is a permissioned digital asset platform that supports, the full asset lifecycle. It can support stablecoins, tokenized deposits, tokenization of assets, and then, of course, the most important point is, is designed for banks, right? So it includes controls and permissions that banks are required to have in place, and of course, we are also supporting banks, integrations into the core banking systems and payment hubs as well. So FIS is one of the largest, fintechs, and we support banks with banks and stakeholders within the financial services industry with software and fintech solutions.
Got it.
So that's about us. And of course, Asia is a super relevant market for us. And banks, of course, are moving to, from pilots, to implementation. And of course, it's no longer a question, can we tokenize something? It's more about, how can we run, those assets safely from our existing banking infrastructure.
Should every bank issue their own stablecoin, do you think?
Oh, that's a very good question. Should they or should they not? And I think we are seeing definitely different permutations, and especially across Asia. I don't think there is one single answer to that. In some markets, the regulatory framework is relatively clear, and banks are sort of allowed to issue their own stable coins, and they have the right options. In other markets, banks are taking a more pragmatic approach. They want to support third-party stable coins through custody solutions, custody settlement, FX, liquidity before they actually take on the issuer obligations themselves. I think we are also seeing a very strong momentum around tokenized deposits, because that model itself, today keeps money closer to the banking system, and of course, connects more naturally to existing deposit treasury and payment infrastructure. So we have seen definitely a lot of interest, not just in stable coins, but also in tokenized deposits.
Okay, don't let me get away from tokenized deposits. I wrote it down, but I just want to make sure I don't forget it. I won't blame you if I do forget, but just help me here, because I want to ask a little bit more about stable coins. Let's just say that regulatorily, like the landscape is flat, and that everybody agrees that like stable coins are okay. So that the regulatory framework is the same. And I'm just going to pick two countries, like nothing against either one of these countries. I think they're both great. But let's just say the regulatory framework is the same in Thailand as it is in Singapore. I don't know if that's true, but let's say it is.
It never is.
Say it again. It never is. I know. But let's say it's close enough from a stablecoin perspective that it's okay for banks to issue their own. Should they? Or should they just do, like, as you said, just do somebody else, just provide custody and settlement services? Like, what do they lose if they don't have their own stablecoin? What kind of agency do they lose if they don't have it? And what do they gain if they do?
Yeah, I think the question is really good. And I think the stablecoins and tokenized deposits, of course, solve very different use cases, right? And it really depends, what bank is looking, to solve in this space, right? In our view, in my view, I think the sort of the question for banks, the real question for banks is not should we issue or not issue. I think the better question is where do we want to set in this value chain within digital assets. Issuance, of course, gives you more control, but also it brings, additional responsibilities. Brings reserve management, licensing, compliance, operational responsibility, and then, of course, with distribution and settlement, that's an easier and faster route to market, right? Custody, liquidity, compliance services, those let banks monetize the trust layer they already own. So it really depends what bank is looking to solve, what are the use cases, and where exactly in the value chain they want to be. So it's more of a question like where exactly do we want to be?
So let me give you an example of a stablecoin, and then tell me how a bank will make money off of it. So it's a bunch of things combined into one question. Again, let's say I'm a Thai SME, and I have Thai baht, but I convert that into a dollar stablecoin because I want to do business with somebody in Vietnam, another SME in Vietnam, and let's say it's harder for them to open a bank account. It's a new business, whatever it is, and they can use stablecoins, but they can't use like local currency for some reason. But they're happy to take dollar-denominated stablecoins, which then they can turn into, because they can do an FX trade, then they can turn into their local currency, they can turn into fiat currency. Where's the bank making money on this, and how is that different than just a normal FX trade?
Yeah, and I think there were several questions in this.
Yeah,
right?
sorry.
And it's quite loaded.
I'm genuinely interested. Like, I care about this, so I'm just. Yeah.
So I think there are different monetization strategies that banks could have today, and of course with stable coins it allows us to have faster, cheaper, more transparent way of making the transactions, right? You don't have to go through existing payment rails, so you already have that reduced cost sort of from the get-go. I personally think the banks need to stop thinking about stablecoin only as a payment fee product. The real value is around, FX. It's around liquidity. It's around, treasury services. It's about, custody, compliance, reporting, settlement, and of course, the corporate, banking integrations, right? And of course, in Asia, the trade and cross-border treasury flows are quite significant.
Huge,
so banks protect and grow their role more significantly. And another thing that you've mentioned, briefly around, the local currency versus dollar, denominated stable coins, whether there is sort of, a place. So in my view, the sort of, the dollar stable coins will continue to matter because they already have that liquidity and they already have that global reach. But local currency stable coins in Asia, they will be important for domestic payments, for merchant settlement, right? For capital markets. And then of course, you have, various, regulated use cases where local money actually matters. So the answer is not really the dollar denominated stablecoins versus local, currency. It's more about, what is the use case? And, at FIS, our platform actually supports, multi-asset, multi-currency layer rather than forcing the banks to have just, a single strategy around stablecoins. So it's kind of answering your question.
But can you answer this for me? This is something that I've still, like, I ask a lot of people this question and I never get the answer that I expect. The US economy, I just looked it up, okay? The GDP is $32 trillion. I mean, it's just the biggest economy in the world. Indonesia's $1.5 trillion. So let's just call it 30 times bigger. Maybe it's 28. Like, my math skills are not that good in my head. They're not that bad either, but why do we need an Indonesian stablecoin? And what is going to be the impact on smaller currencies and smaller country GDPs if the stablecoin of use of record is going to be the dollar? Because unless something massive changes in the world, and again, we don't know. I mean, I couldn't have predicted that the Straits of Hormuz were going to be closed for like the last 6 months, the last 3 months. So like, what's stopping the hegemony of a US dollar stablecoin from making a stablecoin in Indonesia completely irrelevant? Like, why would an SME need it if they just have local currency? They could just use local currency for everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it makes sense. Of course, it's a very, a good, question. Of course, there is a sort of, a big, a large, liquidity today that exists, within sort of, dollar denominated, stable coins. And, I would probably say those are sort of, the large, pools and, the reach of those, stable coins, are quite, global. Looking at some of the largest stablecoin providers, right?
But also the flip side of like not every trade, but of like every third trade in the world is probably a US dollar somehow, even if it's between two countries where their natural currency isn't dollars, because maybe the production facilities in China and it's just easier for them to charge in dollars and then switch it into their local currency. So I'm just wondering, like, once you have, and the problem with the dollar as a thing is that it's not fundamentally a digital currency. So it does have friction associated with it, whereas the stablecoin doesn't. And then you give access to that dollar denominated stablecoin to people that don't want the friction of a fiat currency. Once you do that, why would they ever use their local currency is, I guess, the question.
Of course, no. So that's a good, question, and
sorry,
it's probably more geopolitical question than
it's a little bit of both. Like, and again, I don't want to talk about politics, but I'm just strategically and structurally, like, it's just easier to use the dollar stablecoin than it would be to take a dollar from your bank account if you have one and then switch it into your local currency. Do you know what I mean? It's just not as easy.
Of course. Yes, of course. And I think, this is definitely a very good question. This is, from my experience and what I have seen, we definitely see a lot of new networks and a lot of new local stable coins that are emerging. And that is response to those, dollar denominated stable coins.
So for example, Japan's doing it as well. Yeah,
exactly. In Japan. And then, you have also in Europe, we have several euro denominated stable coins that are trying to sort of, bring that liquidity into the space. I think, there's definitely going to be a need and desire and also a regulatory push from the local, governments, to use more of a local currency.
Right.
And of course, you as a bank, you don't want to displace or disintermediate yourself. So
sure.
you will have to have support for both. But there will definitely be probably a more support for local currency issued stablecoins. And I don't have the crystal ball, but there are already some restrictions on what could be done in terms of usage of dollar denominated stablecoins. The restrictions, and also I think from the fintech issued stablecoin management perspective, for banks, I think there are additional rules and also additional requirements, right? So for banks, it will be probably in the longer run, it will be easier to issue local currency denominated stable coins rather than using dollar in those transactions across borders, right?
Yep.
So there will definitely be a regulatory push for that, and we have seen that in several markets.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is less of a currency question and more of a and less of a technology question and more of a just like sovereignty question. Okay, fair enough.
Exactly.
Can I ask you this? Why are tokenized deposits a thing? Like, why do we want to tokenize deposits? What do we gain? So, and again, just so I understand this, I take $100, which is all I have in the world. I put it into a bank account, and then the bank tokenizes it. Like, why is that different? How does it work? Why would they do that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think from the perspective of tokenized deposits, it's definitely clearer to banks on how to manage a tokenized deposit, and it's basically follows the same framework that banks follow with deposits today. So from that perspective, banks know how to handle tokenized deposits versus stablecoins, right? Stablecoins are new, and there are additional requirements for banks. With tokenized deposits, it's a product that they could seamlessly enable with the existing regulation that exists around deposits. So and again I think both the stable coins and tokenized deposits will exist in this environment, and then more on the sort of tokenized deposit, is it a real sort of product? It is, because you have requirements that are less burdening, for a bank, and of course, banks can seamlessly start, issuing, tokenized deposits, given the current regulatory frameworks.
And are they going to compete with stablecoins, or they're just a separate product all on their own?
I consider those to be, separate, products on their own. I don't think, stablecoins compete, with tokenized deposits.
Okay.
The volume of payments, of course, globally is increasing. So I think the both stablecoin values and tokenized deposit values are going to grow. So in my view, they're sort of non-competing, and they're also solving slightly different use cases in these instances.
Fair enough. So before I let you go, like, which tokenized assets have the most demand from real customers? Do you know what I mean? Is it like something simple like gold or oil or commodities? Or is it something more sophisticated like a hedge fund or a mutual? Do you know what I mean? Like, where do people want these tokenized? Or is it just real estate?
Yes, and I think in Asia we have seen tokenization of various assets. We have seen a tokenization of gold. We are actually working at the moment on tokenization of gold project. Also, we have seen tokenization of other commodities and other assets as well. Also, we have seen a lot of tokenization of money market funds and securities and bonds, and that space also is growing in Asia. And what we have seen from the banking community in Asia is they do want to enable all these assets from one place. So when we are working on enabling a stablecoin and tokenized deposits, banks are also asking us, how this could help them to enable other tokenization use cases. So banks want one solution that essentially solves all their problems from the infrastructure perspective. So we are definitely seeing a strong demand, for tokenization of assets in, very different, spaces. And it really depends on the jurisdiction and depends, on how the regulatory framework is, developing and how strong it is, to support those tokenization use cases.
Are we still at a point where the digital wallet, these crypto wallets, are the only place where tokenized assets, where stablecoins and the such can be stored? Or are we moving towards a situation where we can have, like, let's call it a hybrid account where I can put my, say it again?
Omnibus account. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because like today, even today, like if I have a bank account in Japan, I can still have dollars in that account in Japan. It's a little bit clunky, right? But I can have dollars. I don't think they support Thai baht, but they definitely support probably dollars, euros, and yen. It's still a little bit clunky to move it around, but I feel like if I now have a stable coin, it's sitting in a completely different place. When do we get to the point where, and I've asked other people this too, we're like, I don't need a digital wallet for myself, but I can have the bank open a digital wallet for me that then can somehow be consolidated in with all of my other sort of regular currency assets, so I can get a better understanding about what I'm holding. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. That makes sense. And I think, we are definitely seeing a lot of that, being, developed at the moment. And, from the infrastructure perspective, we are working with, several banks exploring, how this, could be done. So I think, that is, coming our way, not just in Asia, but I think, globally.
Right.
So, I think, very soon we will have a situation where you go to your bank and you can also store various, digital assets. And I think that's already happening with, some banks, but I think, it's going to be evolving, in the next, couple of, months. And we are definitely seeing, more demand, for sort of, one-stop shop,
because I think for some people, like, these digital wallets just feel like really inaccessible. They don't know what's going on inside. Like, for me, it's not a big deal, but for some regular people, it just feels like, I don't know, can I just have a bank account? You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think, we are definitely seeing a lot of, movement and a lot of sort of, co-development, between, fintechs, issuers, crypto native, companies and, banks as well in this space. And then, of course, we at FIS will also, help, banks and sort of, making an architecture that is, viable to make that journey seamless, for customers and stakeholders.
Perfect. Okay. Look, Julia, you were awesome. We definitely do not have enough conversations with FIS. Everybody that we've met from there has been pretty spectacular. You also fall into that category. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Martin, let's bring Tom in as soon as we can. I can have conversations about digital assets, tokenization, and about stablecoins for as long as you want. Julia was great. We definitely still need to learn more. I think it needs all this kind of stuff. While stablecoins are becoming more widespread and more common, I do think we need to think about the implications of having stablecoins in dollars. I really want people to have a real conversation about this, in the sense that the dollar itself is already hegemonistic at some level. I do understand that, what's happening in the world does play a part in what's happening here. But I also think that, like, stablecoins could have these unanticipated consequences as they just become way easier to use, particularly for the underbanked and underserved, if that makes sense. And that just keeps happening. I think dollar hegemony doesn't take away from it, regardless of what today's geopolitics are. Okay, Martin, let's bring Tom in. Got it. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Levi. Levi, how are you? Can you hear me okay? Thank you for stepping in for Tom at the last minute. It's great to have you. Okay, Martin, bring him into the main. Okay, we wanted to have thanks for coming and doing this. And look, we wanted to have a conversation with you guys about how blockchain-enabled software helps businesses build trusted, accountable, and autonomous digital systems. And we wanted to talk about agentic AI as well. But maybe tell us a little bit about Holotech, and then we'll see where the blockchain stuff fits into supporting autonomous agents. Yeah.
Right. I appreciate it. And I'm very glad to have the opportunity to be inside the show today.
Thank you, man.
To give everybody a little brief of who Holotech is, we're basically a dev shops, or more or less we're an offshore firm based out in Vietnam, Hanoi, which is one of the capitals.
Great.
Hanoi is a place where a lot of institutions and a lot of governance relies on. That's where we decided to base our company over there. We've been inside the game for roughly around 6 to 7 years now, and we started up building traditional projects. Yeah, but now we decide to fully went ahead and build a lot of products out, be extended on a lot of ecosystems and foundations needs it, because personally speaking, sometimes we are a startup back then in the past, so we can't understand what it needs to be able to grow product out to be good, considering we've already done out 200 plus product from blockchain to AI internal itself, and working with most. Now I've been working with Zero Gravity, for example, on their compute professionals, as well as even with the Perpetual Dex too. So yeah, we got a lot of skin inside the game, building a lot of good foundations, and that's basically from a high level standards. We provide a lot of manpower to institutions to order with startup. Yeah.
Got it. Can you tell me like where blockchain infrastructure should fit in or evolve to support autonomous agents? Like where does that fit into all the stuff that you guys are doing?
Right. I think personally speaking, from the past few quarters, especially how agentic commerce is shaping nowadays.
Agentic commerce,
it's gonna be leaning more. Yeah, it's gonna be leaning more about provenance as well as accountabilities. So I'm sure you've understood about AI models, right?
Yep.
It's black box owned by centralized entities, and blockchain cannot fix the black box part. That's a math problems. But then you can create a very good audit trail for who trained the model, also data plugging inside, and what decision it makes. So that also give out who's non-benefited. And I think most people think blockchain AI means we run inference on chain, right? But that's mostly
you're running inference on chain?
Yeah. Most people think it. Most people think blockchain AI means that it runs inference on chain. But that's a very common misconception.
Got it.
Chain overhead is too high, right? Chain overhead is too high. And from our perspective, when it comes to building, is the real play over here is actually using these blockchain technologies as the coordination layer for, let's just say, distributed training or validation network. Yeah.
But wait, so what do you mean? In other words, you want to use the blockchain to do proofing, whether it's zero knowledge proof or any kind of proofing, so that the output or even the input into a large language model is somehow approved by the blockchain itself?
Yeah,
or
kind
by
of.
some distributed ledger technology? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So when it comes to what I meant about blockchain proofing is right.
Yep.
The problem is when you have a decentralized training network.
Yep.
Like just take Zero Gravity, for example. So where multiple parties, they contribute data. Let's say Levi trains for 100 hours. And then Levi contribute a model checkpoints. And then Tom trains for 50 hours and then contribute to another checkpoints. There's these sort of third parties, which is the third guy that merges them. So you cannot verify this with a traditional consensus because model quality is subjective, There's no objective ground truth like, is this transaction valid or not?
Where does this become a problem? Can we get an actual use case where like someone's going to want this kind of validation inside of a system that's doing artificial intelligence or that's employing or deploying an LLM or frankly an agentic AI as well? In other words, are we adding another layer on top of an activity where it's necessary for confirmation? Like where does it come into play?
So that's a very good question. We used to work with a manufacturing company in Vietnam. So they got 10 years of sensor data from their factories. Like it's all IP competitive advantage. And we realized that there's a quality control problems. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to solve with your own data. So it's silo, you know, it's very fragmented and is biased. And the thing about this is that when we talk with their business analysts, competitors in Thailand and Indonesia, they have the same similar problems.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So with the way that a lot of technologies advancement has been going now is that either you need to pay cloud providers, let's say Azure in that circumstances to train a model, demand the data, hope they don't sell it or use it against you. And if you want to actually incorporate blockchain or AI to inside it, you're probably gonna want to train a collaborative predictive models. Because
for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This help you predict out equipment failures like 2 weeks early in.
Say that again. You what?
This can predict equipment failure 2 weeks early. And
how does that work? How can it predict equipment failure 2 weeks early?
Yeah, so if you want to make sure how it predicts, right? And the way that I'm telling you this is that we don't need any sort of sensor data or not. The simple version is that each sort of factories, when we work with those guys, they had a local model trained on their own data.
Right.
So when they need a prediction for, say, let's just say for sending the sensors reading to their local models,
right,
or even get predictions, they're going to be using a model that's trained collaboratively, but the inference happen locally and instantly, you know.
Okay, and does blockchain itself help AI systems become like better governed? Is there a place for governance here where the blockchain systems can actually help contribute to governance as well?
That's a funny use case though, because personally speaking, when I got the chance to talk with Alex, which is the co-founder from Nonsense, he basically thinks that if blockchain doesn't inherently make AI governance better, it's kind of shift the problems. So yeah, he told me about the funny fact that most of his friends were thinking is that decentralized decision makings, no single entities control the models, transparencies. Those are basically some of the three things that he also knows the most as the common understandings. But the reality is that you just move control from a chief executive officers to a DAO or a smart contract.
Right.
So now it's one person deciding. You have like token holders voting. You have validators enforcing rules. I think just similar to what you just asked me earlier, right? The only thing blockchain I think helps governance out is the accountabilities. That's basically the real win. And even with blockchains, every training decision is gonna help us understand who approved it with timestamp data and even provenance too.
Got it. Okay, one last thing and then I let you go. As you look out into the future, where do you think the intersection is of blockchain and AI? Where's that heading?
Yeah, blockchain and AI, if we're looking at blockchain and AI nowadays, especially with all the things that we've seen and built over the past quarters, is that AI as the infrastructures. I think personally, we're moving towards these sort of ways where AI has stood far from becoming like a traditional software as a service, you know. So Kai AI, the founder, which is Chi Zhang, she's very wonderful. She's very talented. I got the chance to meet her in Hong Kong doing Consensus. the way she envisions her agentic commerce is that it's payment native. It's served for agentic commerce. We don't build just to serve it and sell it as a service. We build it so that in later on, people can use it as the infrastructures. And for blockchain, it's only served as a trust layer for it. Say today we have centralized AI like ChatGPT, Claude, or we have ledgers like Bitcoin, Ethereum's, and they're all separate.
Got it. Okay. It looks like
I've got a chance to talk with the one of the folks that are working in the defense ministries of Vietnam right now. They were having a discussion about, let's just say, a company that needs a predictive model for supply chains, right?
Yep.
There were a PhD guys that explained in the futures how it might work. Is this AI training might gonna be able to happen off chain because it's still expensive on chain, right? A smart contract might gonna be able to manage the coordinations and settlements. And then oracles, right? The one that we're using right now, oracles and ledgers, they can feed real feedback inside, actual demand versus prediction. And the most important thing when I look at this is that you get privacies and efficiency of a off-chain computations with audit trail. So neither works alone. They coexist and they make each other better.
Got it. Okay. Levi, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it. Tell Tom we said hi, and hopefully next time he can join us as well. And good luck.
I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, everybody. Thank you to everybody who watched. Thank you to everybody who joined us on the show today. We really appreciate it. That is going to be it today for ATP Insights. Give us a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube. And follow us on all of our socials on X, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. As always, let us know in the comments if there's anything you would like us to discuss on our upcoming shows. We'd love to have engagement with our audience. My name is Michael Waitz. I'm going to say goodbye for now.